Hey guys, it's Danny. As promised, today we are going to revisit this orchid which we repotted about a month ago, take it out of its pot and inspect the root system, pretty much do a repot, how I like to call them. Since, if you remember last time, we did have quite a big quantity of roots which to me did not look so healthy, they didn't look like they would adapt to this new environment. Typically, when an orchid has a lot of older roots, I do find there is a lot of dieback on those roots as well. So what I like to do is a little thing called a repot. I let the orchid in its new environment for about a month, and after a month I go back, unpot the orchid and see what roots made it and what roots didn't, and obviously cut away everything that is not alive anymore. So we're gonna do that today, but also we're gonna talk a little bit about why we need to cut away these roots, why they don't adapt in the first place, a few ideas of just why I'm doing what I'm doing. So that said, before we start, don't forget to give this video a like if you end up enjoying it. Why not subscribe? It is free and I post 3 times a week, but if you're feeling a little extra about it, consider further supporting my channel by either becoming a member or using the affiliate links down below, or getting some merch, or using the super thanks option down below my videos. And if you do have a question in that super thanks, I will actually make a separate video on my shorts channel just for you. Alrighty, so with that said, let's start. By the way, I switched my little tablecloth here. I don't know how this looks like on camera. We're gonna see. If I don't like it, we're gonna switch it next time. Somebody's angry outside. Okay, let's get the tray and see what's in this pot. Alright, so the main reason for doing this procedure is to remove all of the dead roots. It is really important when we grow orchids in pots to do this, because those roots will just spoil the new medium faster, that's one, and also acidify the environment so much that even the new roots, and particularly the new root tips, can get affected, can get burned, and in very severe cases we can end up with a rootless orchid just because we left on the old decaying roots. Now, naturally, in their natural habitat, this is not a problem because these orchids grow up on the tree or in between the rocks. There are all sorts of microorganisms starting to eat at that decaying matter. In cultivation, we have springtails, but they're just one component of the natural cycle of things, let's put it like that. So in nature, there are multiple organisms just munching and feeding on those decaying roots. Also, when it rains, everything gets washed down to the ground where it becomes quote-unquote compost and so on. In a pot, that doesn't really happen. Even if we flush the pot, those bits of roots, they will not run through the pot because they will get jammed in the air pockets of the medium. So what they will do is just stay there and rot away pretty much. So it's really not beneficial to let them be. Now, roots don't last forever, and even healthy roots at some point, after many years, they will wither off, and that is absolutely fine. But in this case, we're not talking about very old roots going away naturally. We are talking about a shock, most probably. If you remember, this orchid was mounted on a horrible drain mount. So the roots were used to growing in the air with probably very little moisture, or much less moisture that I'm offering in this pot and generally in pots. So whenever that happens, I find that the older the roots, the less they can adapt to a new environment. But because the older roots have a great chance of not making it, what I like to do in these extraordinary cases is just go back and see what roots I need to remove. Excuse you. There's quite the activity on the terrace. I will absolutely reuse all of this medium, including the moss. And now I am going to remove the remaining moss. Do you see how fluffy I packed everything? Do you see how fluffy everything is here? This is what I want. I don't need a very compacted moss. That ends in disaster. I need aerated moss. And I already see quite a few roots that didn't make it, which is okay. And see how easy I removed the sphagnum moss from between the roots. Now I see good news as well. I see new root tips growing, but yeah, there are a lot of dead roots. Dare I say, most of the roots. Oh brother, see? I knew this would happen. Right, so I want to make a little space on my tray here so I don't mix the dead roots with the sphagnum moss. See which one is mushy and which one I need to cut, and it's everything. I'll give you a little bit of close-up just so you see how it looks like. There we go. Visually, I don't know if we can tell, but Yeah, I think it looks like the roots are really mushy. Look at this. So I do believe pretty much everything needs to be cut away, but that is a good thing because we do have brand new roots on the way. I see a total of 3 new growths, which is great. So we're gonna have roots soon. Even if this orchid will go through some dehydration phases, it's not gonna take long because new roots are growing already. So let's just start cutting. And just to clarify something, since I did get a comment yesterday, cutting away already dead roots has no impact on your orchid. I had a viewer saying that they followed my advice and they cut away all of the mushy roots, and surprise, surprise, the orchid still went downhill. And they associated cutting the mushy roots with that. And really, that is impossible to have had an effect. If a root is already dead, it has no impact on the orchid. You can consider it disconnected from the orchid itself. It does not communicate with it. It doesn't have any live tissue to communicate with the orchid. What dead roots can do is affect the environment in a negative way. They have no positives in a pot. So just for your peace of mind, cutting away dead roots will not harm your orchid. It is not a guarantee that your orchid will start to do better all of a sudden. We're not doing miracles here, but oh wow, look at that. This is a totally different growth. I'm gonna pot it together. So yeah, your orchid could still go downhill if the problem is a different one, if those roots that you did leave on ended up dying as well. Just like in this case, none of these roots managed to adapt, but it's not the dead root's fault. It has no impact. So just so you know, it's okay to cut away all of these things. Don't worry about it. So I cut away everything that I could, and at this point I have so much just decaying matter here. I'm just gonna remove it like this. And even if I leave on some strings, that is okay. If you leave on just a little bit of root stumps and things of the sorts, that's generally okay. What you don't have is a whole lot of mass of decaying roots in the pot. Quantity matters. And I'm gonna give you a close-up of those brand new roots growing, just so you see why I'm not worried at all. I will actually take away some of these very, very old growths as well because they're just not needed. They're very, very old and they're already dehydrated. And in my experience, the very, very, very old, the oldest growth doesn't really recover all that well. And in the end, it withers off on its own. So that's why I like to remove this very old growth. This is seedling growth. There's no need to keep these since they are on their way out anyway. Now, in that initial video, I said that I like to do these repots about a month after I do the initial repot. And this is because in a month, the roots that would not make it will already show clear signs of not making it, like in this case. But at the same time, the new roots or potential new roots that might have grown, in this case, I didn't have much growth, but in other cases you might. Each orchid is a little different. So in that case, the new roots don't have enough time to go and attach to the sides of the pot and just become established. In a month, there's really not much going on. So even if you disturb, quote unquote, the roots again, it's not really gonna have an impact because there won't be a lot of roots to speak of in the first place, and they certainly will not be established yet. You need a few months, upwards of 3 months, to have brand new roots establishing and growing out of the drainage holes and so on, posing a risk to repotting, let's say. A month is generally not enough time. There will always be exceptions, but we're working with statistics here. All right, so I am about done. Let me show you on this new growth a brand new root tip that is just growing. Let's see, can you see it right here? I'll put an arrow or something on the screen. Do you see that? That is a brand new root, which in another month's time will be big as this or even longer and able to absorb water. So in 1 month's time, the orchid will already start to look much, much better and the signs of dehydration will start to slowly recede. Epiphytic orchids generally, and Cattleyas in particular, are very good at withstanding drought. Now, this drought doesn't necessarily mean that you're not watering or the medium is dry, but it just means the orchid is not absorbing water. Now, in our case, it is not absorbing water because it does not have roots. And foliar absorption is just, it doesn't work. Don't even count on it. So when they're dehydrated, orchids can actually save up on that water and limit the amount of water they lose. The downside is respiration is not optimal. So in this phase, growth is severely slowed down. It will also be much smaller because the orchid is just not functioning at 100% capacity. It is in survival mode, but it's really, really good at surviving. So we're not worried, and we're gonna expect a little bit of a setback, but that is okay. So now I'm just potting back the orchid in the same medium, very, very fluffy sphagnum moss, as you can see, and just redo the whole arrangement, making sure that I don't put back any dead roots, which sometimes happens. They get caught in the sphagnum moss strands, so I need to be a little careful. There we are, very fluffy, very nice. Right now, probably my orchid will be very, very wobbly, so I will also use a bamboo skewer. And these pseudobulbs are really tiny, so the clip will do the job. And look at that, the orchid is stable. Time to add slow release fertilizer. I have the brand that I use mentioned down below in the description if you scroll down. And the top layer, of course, is bark. And I like to use bark because it's light, it's not going to compact my sphagnum moss, and it's also breathable. The pieces are large enough to retain quite a lot of air in between them, so water can still evaporate through the spaces in between the bark. Since the bark does not retain water, it is also not prone to having algae on it, which is great. But I think we are looking pretty good. Right, so we are done. Now the sphagnum moss was already wet because I watered like a few days ago, and there is no point to re-water this orchid since the moss was wet. I'm just gonna let it be. There are no roots anyway, but it is important for the moss to be slightly damp because brand new roots and the root tips actually really appreciate and grow better in a more humid environment, in a very dry environment. And some of you might know this, root tips sometimes tend to stop growing. That is quote unquote normal. It is due to the low humidity perhaps in your environment. And that's okay, you don't need to do anything. If the roots in the pot grow where there's more moisture, you're good. You don't need aerial roots, as we call them. If you have them, great, but you don't have to jump through hoops in order to make them thrive. Alright, so we are done. One thing I want to do is just shorten this stake. There we go. The longer the stakes are, the more probable it is for them to just get caught on my clothing when I water and bump the orchid over. It's a whole mess, so I prefer to cut them to size. Right, so as far as the orchid is concerned, it is like it never happened because already dead roots, as I was saying, they're not connected to the orchid in the chemical way, let's say. How should I say this? They don't communicate with the rest of the orchid anymore if the tissue is gone. And also, since there weren't any new roots already attached to the pot that maybe we snapped or bruised, again, the orchid does not know that something happened. It has no detection of it. So we are good. All we can do now is care for the orchid normally, try to make sure we're not keeping it very soggy because we don't actually have too many roots to speak of just yet. Just make sure it is fairly moist, and I can just, maybe I can tilt it. I can look at the bottom through the drainage hole to see if the moss is still moist. If it's still moist, I'm not gonna offer water. I'm gonna water it pretty infrequently. And in about 3 months or so, I should have quite a decent amount of roots in this pot, time at which I can go ahead and start watering it normally with my other orchids. But we are good. Righty, so that is about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you missed the initial video in which I struggled to remove it from that horrible mount, you'll have it linked down below. So I hope you've enjoyed hanging out with me today. Hope you learned something new. Let me know how you feel about the lighter colored desk cloth. I don't even know how to call it. The reason I use it is because this is transparent and it's just very distracting to see like under, right? Anyway, I thought I would switch it up. So with that said, if you want to follow me on social media, search for me. I'm at MissOrchidGirl pretty much everywhere. Check out my shorts channel for short form content, but most importantly, do subscribe to this channel because this is where I post the good stuff. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye!